Okay, about the Smith Lecture. Andrew Smith was a student here. He was born in Washington, D.C. on June 16, 1963. He was the son of Dr. David Smith and Mrs. Alice Gillen. He grew up in Pennington, New Jersey, and he came to Syracuse University in 1981, where he studied economics at the Maxwell School. At Syracuse, Andrew was a member of ROTC and the men's swim team, and he was elected captain of the swim team in his senior year. After graduating from Syracuse in 1985, Andrew worked at Chubb Insurance Corporation. Unfortunately, he was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma a few years later, and after a courageous battle against the disease, Andy died on New Year's Day in 1991. Shortly after Andy's death, his family established the Andrew Smith Swimming Scholarship at Syracuse University. The fund was used until 2006 to provide scholarships and financial support to student athletes on the men's swim team. When the university discontinued the men's swim team in 2007, the family chose to support a lecture series in economics in Andy's name. Today, it is our honor to present the 4th Andrew F. Smith Lecture in International Economics and Development. We are grateful to Andy's family for choosing to honor him through this gift to the Maxwell School and to the Economics Department. The lecture has allowed us to bring a series of internationally distinguished scholars discussing some of the most important issues facing world leaders and society, including today's topic of European governance in the midst of the migration crisis. I'm going to invite my colleague, Professor Alfonso Flores Lagunas, to introduce our very distinguished speaker today. Thank you. Alfonso?
Well, thank you very much, Mary. Thank you very much, all of you, for being here. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Klaus F. Zimmermann, a speaker in this year's Andrew F. Smith Lecture in International Economics and Development. Summarizing, essentially, Dr. Zimmermann is one of the most dynamic, energetic, influential, and outspoken economists today, really. He received his doctorate from University of Mannheim and works in the areas of labor economics, development, population economics, migration economics, and he is a very prolific academic. He has written over 55 books, 160 academic articles in refereed journals, and 150 articles in collected volumes. He has a number of positions and assignments. He's currently visiting professor, as you can see, at Princeton University. He's co-director of the Center for Population, Development, and Labor Economics at the United Nations University and Maastricht University. He's a professor on leave from Bonn University. He's president of the newly created Global Labor Organization. And he's also editor-in-chief of the Journal of Population Economics, a very important journal in that area. He holds a number of honorary professorships from different universities, among them Maastricht University, Free University of Berlin, and Renmin University in China. He is a member of the German National Academy of Sciences, the European Academy of Sciences, and he is a fellow at a number of different centers throughout the world. He has been advisor. He is one of those academics that has a passion for informing policy. So he has been an advisor for institutions like the World Bank, different nations as well, the EU Commission. And in that same spirit, he has also been writing his opinions in different outlets such as the New York Times, Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, and other national outlets, such as Le Figaro in France. He is, perhaps in academia, he is best known for being the founder president of the Institute for the Study of Labor, ICA, which is, which under his guidance has become the world's largest network of economists. And in particular, true to what I've been mentioning about his passion not only for academia, but also for taking academic work to policymakers making a difference in the world and also to society at large, ICA had a number of initiatives that truly built bridges between academia and academics and policymakers and society. With this introduction, I am very happy to introduce and ask Dr. Zimmermann to come and give his presentation on European governance in the face of the migration crisis. Please join me in welcoming him.
Well, Mary, Alfonso, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, I'm very overwhelmed by this warm welcome, and I'm very happy to be here today and to talk to you about the important topic we have. And after we have solved the echo problem, because I have an additional microphone here, we can go ahead. This topic, European governance in the face of the migration crisis, is in the middle of my research agenda for 20 years, so to speak, since we had at many times many crises, and migration was, since I once moved to become a professor at Munich University, became my favorite research topic. So I'm involved in that for a long time, and I was in many ways advising governments, the EU Commission, the German government, the World Bank on these kind of issues. Anyway, we are for many years having a huge stock of knowledge, and we try to get rid of this knowledge as scientists. And it's amazing how few of our knowledge get at the end recognized. This is different from other parts of our disciplines in economics in general. I was advising the German government, for instance, on the famous Hartz reforms, yes, the labor market reforms, which made Germany strong under Chancellor Schröder, but yeah, there the government was listening, but the same government was not listening when it comes to migration issues. So in a way, it's an interesting topic for a scientist to see an area he has worked long and where he thinks the profession has lots to say, not only economics, but also disciplines who are dealing with that have lots to say. But the wider audience is not accepting the results. In a way, it coincides with what we know these days from various other areas of where scientists are going on. We are in an area of evidence-free policy making, whereas we long was pushing for evidence-based policy making. We are in an area of evidence-free policy making. We as migration economists are a long time knowing about this, and so we are puzzled, as many of you maybe, that it's now has taken over the issue also of globalization as a threat, and migration as a threat, where the evidence often says the opposite, is interesting. So when I say European governance in face of the migration crisis, I take the word migration crisis more as what the public think it is. And because the public think it is a crisis, it is one, yes? However, it's not because the migration challenge is so big. It's because the way how we react to it is what makes it a crisis. So it's a crisis of the institutions, and a crisis of the governance issues. That's why the governance issue is very relevant in this context. Now, let me try to move this slide and give you, in the first step, a short overview of how I will proceed the next 45 or so minutes with you before we hopefully then are done and can talk about the issues which are of interest to you. Now, first I would like to start with providing you with some key insights in the topic, in the crisis, in the challenging problems, in the messages I would like to give as a kind of overview of what you should take with you back home, hopefully, when you are interested in what I'm saying. Then I give a few references for literature, because I'm a scientist, so we have to back up what we are saying, and you also may wish to here and there look into details of what I was saying. So it's not one written manuscript for exactly this talk, but there are a few little manuscripts, even for those who want to just spend half an hour on getting back to what I said. And I give you some hints on that, and they can be all found on my website. Then I will talk a little bit about perceptions, because obviously what people think is much more important nowadays, what is there. And the question is, why do people think a few things? And what are the reasons behind? And there is, of course, research on perceptions and evaluations of and attitudes. There's literature on attitudes research. And there's also an issue on a topic or research on the migration topic and what people think about migration. And it's interesting to see some of these findings. Then I would like to go into some facts, because after all, facts for scientists are very important. What are the facts which are there and which are maybe ignored? And we have to discuss why. And then we, at the end, come to the policy issues, which are related to that. What are the real key policy questions? What are the current answers? What could be better answers? And in particular, we can organize that in the European context. And at the end, I have some conclusions and a basic message. Now, when I'm speaking about Europe, yes, I'm speaking in the European context, but most of what I'm saying has global relevance, in particular for the US of today. Yes, the issue, should you have a wall or not? I mean, we discuss it in Europe also. We cannot have one wall, but many walls. We have many fences already again. That is certainly similar. Also, the issue is migration good or bad? Has been covered. We talk a little bit more about refugees, because you may be involved, like other nations, in creating refugees, but the United States is not so much involved in taking refugees. Yes. Europe is different, but if I say Europe, not even Europe takes lots of refugees. It's mainly or largely Germany taking refugees. Yes, that's why the big, why everybody is scared about refugees. It's not so fully clear why this is the case. It has nothing to do with reality. But what I'm saying is, in a way, even if I speak about Europe, it has relevance for many areas in the world, not only for the United States and Europe, but in particular for those regions also. Now, key insights. Well, there are some prominent views about Europe. I go very far back in history. We must build a kind of United States of Europe. Winston Churchill, speaking in Zurich in 1946. I think that's one point. We have Europe, we have the European Union, but we do not have a United States of Europe. We have a collection of individual states who try to cooperate, but not necessarily feel that they want to cooperate. They are not very similar to these states, to the United States of America. And then there's another sentence related to Robert Schuman, one of the holy ghosts of the European Union and the movement, so to speak. Europe will not be made all at once. Well, we see that after 60 years, we just celebrated, by the way, 60 years of the European integration process. Europe will not be made all at once or according to a single plan. It will be built through concrete achievements, which first create de facto solidarity. De facto solidarity was important from the beginning, and it's also very important nowadays. And when I am choosing this site and emphasize it, I also say that this solidarity is missing nowadays again, and it's still relevant and needed. Yes, it was perhaps there for a while, but it's kind of the issue, the challenge, which we have to face the so-called migration crisis. And certainly, Europe cannot solve the problem at hand by leaving it to the individual member states, and we do not need, or to Germany, we don't need the European Union. We need Europe acting as a whole entity. So the governance issue comes in, and the issue of United States of Europe comes in. Well, the relevance of migration and labor mobility is sometimes difficult to explain to a wider audience. Also, economists should immediately accept this, but not even among economists it's completely accepted. That, well, I mean, economics is about job, division of work, yes, in a way, at the end of the day, and about optimal allocation of resources. That's why it should be intuitively clear that by moving the most precious resources we have, people, through time and space, and dividing them to different jobs is a very important issue that creates higher and better output and more and more welfare, income and jobs. So it's about income and jobs to have the right people at the right place. That's why, mobility is very important to adjust to disequilibrium. It's not the movement as such from equilibrium to equilibrium, which is so relevant, as many of our colleagues have shown, that it's there, but maybe not as big as some people think. But it's the adjustment of markets and economies in disequilibria, which is very important to react to asymmetric shocks. So by all that, it's not very surprising that from the very beginning, the single European labor market was in the middle of the emphasis of those people who were building Europe. Yes, well, that it's not completed until now does only not mean that it's not important, but it's a very challenging and difficult issue. So that is certainly what it was clear from the beginning. It's part of all the contracts which were made since the 50s in Europe. However, nevertheless, I will come back to that, it's still nowadays under threat, and our rising threat. More and more people ask, it's not about having people from Africa coming to, let's say, Amsterdam. It's about that Poles or Germans move to London. Yes, it's a very different category. It's an internal issue even that we are debating at the moment. So, yeah, migration-related challenges for Europe. There is first the issue of internal mobility. Yes, so this is entirely EU internal. So can somebody who lives in Poland move to France to take up a job? Yes, that's the issue. And are there restrictions or no restrictions? And this is important for the inner, if you have a joint market, for the inner adjustment of the economy. Then nowadays a little bit ignored, but discussed since I did my PhD thesis, which is a long time ago, that there will be coming, demography can be predicted decades ahead, yes? Demographic change will come, and EU, not as much as the United States, is a region, an area where the population is aging and shrinking. So it's clear that you can have an optimal population which is lower than what we currently have. Yes, that's not, we were smaller in history, but the issue is the transition period. That's why, and also the worldwide competition for maybe workers, skilled workers, and the US is very much engaged in hiring skilled workers from around the world, attracting skilled people. And that's why this issue also says, while we may have short-term solved our short-term problems, if you have them, even then we have a long-term issue as Europe. We need more people in the long term in Europe coming from other parts of the world, and we should keep that into our activity. Now, that means well, we need an immigration policy, but Europe has no immigration policy. Immigration as such, because the immigration issue is covered by the member states directly. There are some overruling promises, but nothing, there's not a general. So all countries have their own policies. In general, we have the position of Fortress Europe. Yes, we should keep our doors closed. That is maybe in the long term an issue. We need a joint common immigration policy which allows people to enter under well-defined rules, to take up jobs, and maybe leave when they no longer have a job. That is part of things we have to discuss. And last but not least, and as I last, is refugees. Refugees have been relevant from time to time. Until recently, refugees were not a big problem. I would argue they're still not a big problem, but the numbers look significantly larger than I admit that. Also in the 19th, we had already large refugee inflows. Whether it's really a challenge, we will see in a moment, but this is certainly what in the public is discussed as a problem. Well, 2015 was a year where the refugee issue started. It was when, in the fall, my chancellor in Germany, Angela Merkel, decided that she should save Europe for a moment by allowing those stranded in Hungary to come to Germany. Where the situation has dramatically after that escalated. At the beginning, Germans were welcoming migrants, refugees. I've seen that myself, where people were waiting at the station, giving presents to incoming refugees. This was kind of where some people said, oh, no, Germans have a welcome culture. Well, it disappeared very soon after, I mean, the critique on this process started. But the year 2015 had begun with something completely different. It had begun with a debate where major parties in Germany were thinking about reforming the immigration policy to allow more openness to recruit workers worldwide, because politicians had realized that the long-term need is there, and we should be prepared for that. But this process was stopped by the refugee debate and also an emphasis to reform our legal immigration laws because the refugee issue was escalating, so at least in the public. Yes? So that is how policy is. It can change from one day to the other. And if the refugee issue would not have come up, Europe, starting with the initiative in Germany, would have looked much more open nowadays. But that's how reality is like, and these are the challenges for our talk here. Now, since the issue is so big and I have only limited time, so I will talk about immigration in general a bit, but I will focus most of what I'm saying on refugees, because the refugee issue seems the big challenge for European governance, and from that edge. That's why I'm concentrating. I'm happy to talk about other issues later when you have questions after the presentation. Now, if it comes to refugees, so we have not one big border with one country where some people think they can create a fence or a wall. Europe is also not an island like Australia or like the UK, where it's more difficult to enter. Europe is fairly open from various areas, and you see the obvious entry challenges or channels and also the entry possibilities. At the moment, the last rounds, most people came through Turkey, but they can also come over the border from Libya or Tunisia. They traditionally also came a lot from the south of Africa through Morocco, but this is at the moment not so relevant. They could, of course, also come through the Eastern Europe. There is some channel even through Finland and Russia. Yes. To protect this whole border, so to speak, is not easy. The question is also, is it the right way to approach the problem? Because there are people who claim they are refugees, who are what is called economic refugees, who just come because they are sent by their families or their villages to earn money and to send money home. That's one issue. But a large part nowadays of people are coming from Syria, and they are really in the middle of a war situation. And the question is, what is the humanitarian way to deal with that? In principle, all European states have signed a contract, agreement that they take refugees for human reasons. And so in principle, there is no right to without examination, to not let people who are in need and for help let into the country, or let them give a chance. Of course, they have no right to be in a particular country. Yes, that's why. But they have also the right to get protection and immediate help. Originally, I can only say that there was an agreement made a couple of years ago in the so-called Dublin Agreement, that the country where refugees arrive would have to take care first of the refugees. That would be Italy, Spain, Greece, just to say a few countries. That most of the refugees nowadays are in Germany is a little bit ironic, because it was Germany who was pushing historically for the Dublin Agreement, because, well, nobody can reach Germany with this law, and we had also political discussions at that time. That we have reacted this time differently just says a bit. So I think the the Dublin Agreement is under threat. It's not realistic as such. Okay, that's already a beginning I just want to start with that. Now, well, the refugees are there, and it's interesting if you look at the debate. It has all kinds of facets, the public debate. There are some people claim it's flooding the European welfare state, yes? There's not much evidence for that, but there are, large numbers. They need help. Okay, this is money. A few billion of dollars will have to go there. Well, some people must say, some colleagues, even economists, have said these refugees will solve our demographic pressures at least until 2025. Yes, so we have demographic pressures. I said that wonderful. We have refugees. They will do that. Some people say simulating growth. If you're Keynesian, you say, oh, we have to spend lots of money, and this will blow up the economy. Yes. Okay, well, it may split the receiving societies. We see that. Yes, in some countries, you have seen the right and left are more or less 50-50. Austria, for instance, an example, the presidential election, or the Dutch election recently. What may happen in France is similar, and so on. Even in Germany, we are doing relatively well with our right-wing people. They are there, but they are not overwhelmingly strong yet. But well, we have to see. Splitting the society, at least the public debates are there. Now, are these refugees destroying the European vision and hence the European Union? Have they caused Brexit? Well, Brexit has been caused by migration, but to a large extent, but not by the refugees. The UK has no refugees, by the way. It has lots of Poles and other East Europeans who worked hard to make the country functioning better. In the cities where these people are, it's already observed. London has also voted for the European Union, but the rural areas have voted against. They are left behind, but not because of Europe or migration, but because people were said, well, in the public, it was relevant. Inner European migration has caused troubles. That was the idea. Yes, there was a fear, and also our colleagues in London, LSE, and other places have provided other evidence. It was ignored completely ignored in the Brexit policy debate and in the decision at the end. So largely, also we look at some of these claims. Neither are they flooding the European welfare state, nor they are solving the demographic pressure, nor they create growth, they maybe split our societies, but the economic arguments are all kind of wrong. Why? The numbers first are so small relatively to the population size that they cannot do all these kind of things. Yes, most people, just take the 2015 thing. About 1 million people refugees came to Germany. Most of, I will come to the numbers later. If those who really will end in the labor market are maybe around 400,000 in Germany, because the others are either not coming, cannot work, or whatever, are not accepted, and they leave again. It's all kind of things like that. If these 400,000 all seek work, yeah, they are long-term unemployed soon, yes, perhaps. They are not very qualified. They are not speaking languages well. They will not compete with natives. They don't create any kind of native unemployment. If they find jobs, fine. We are desperately search people for jobs. We have the fastest growing labor force ever, and so many jobs. We desperately seek people for getting employed. We will not find them largely there, but even if everybody would remain unemployed, the German unemployment rate would rise for half a percentage point. Half of a percentage point, the unemployment would rise if all the 400,000 in 2015 would have stayed would stay unemployed. Yes, so the threat is relatively, small. So it's not really an economic issue. It's a challenging issue for institutional societies. It's a challenge for the media democracies. It's a challenge for European identity building, because this is used by many people or in many states to push what I call the demand or the desire for ethnic homogeneity. Yes, so Poles want to be Poles, Hungarians want to be Hungarians. They don't want to have five more people from Syria or whatever. It's a country. That is the real, fact which is existing. Now. Let me give some major points of analysis on background before I go selectively in some of the details. Well, there is lots of literature nowadays. 20 years before, there was not, all the research on migration was done for the United States. But nowadays, we have 20, 30 years of intensive research, and I personally was involved in not only doing it, but also bringing other people to do research on Europe in many countries. Like also in other areas of the world, there was just a recent report from the Academy of Sciences for the United States on the migration issue. Migration is typically considered by the majority, not everybody, as always in science, considered to be as in generally beneficial. This has to do with, for instance, an example, EU East enlargement. We had a huge natural experiment, so to speak, we integrated a larger number of East European countries, and these were very, very mobile. They went to work everywhere in Europe. And we know from studies for all of these countries that, they have enriched the labor market and the economy, which was going much better. So there was no welfare take-ups, there was no natives pushed out of the market, there was in general better goods and services. Then internal mobility. Europe is less mobile than the United States. The United States is better in when there are asymmetric shocks somewhere, there is mobility to adjust for that. In Europe, even with the euro, which requires more labor mobility, the labor mobility was never very high, but it became higher through EU enlargement, but also in the process of integration in the eurozone. So what is needed is not perfect, but it has improved. So we need more mobility than we have, not less. So more migration, not less. And even with a big disequilibrium, there are tons of young people unemployed in Spain, but they don't move to Germany or Austria or the Netherlands where there are jobs out of many reasons. Some of them move more. It looks large, but it's not large. It's large in percentage, not in absolute numbers. So we don't have enough migration, not too much. Even internally, yes, this is internal. Then refugees in the labor market. Yes, I will go deeper into that. There is slow assimilation of refugees into the labor market. They are not as people who come for work primarily. Yes, they may also want to work. Most of them want to work. But they're slow in assimilation. They are here and there negative, but even by critiques of the whole thing admitted, there are small effects only on native employment, but only when the migrants who come in as the refugees are competitive. If they're high quality migrants or refugees, then they compete with high quality, high educated natives, or if they're low qualified, then they compete with that area. There are effects, but they are not large in size. Okay, then we have attitudes towards migrants and refugees. Most of the attitudes we observe are based on misperceptions, typically as a message, if we have no labor integration policies or labor recruiting policies in a country, people are particularly suspicious about migrants. There where people see that people are working, there the perceptions are much more positive. So refugees are not responsible for the breakdown of European identity. We have since long a tendency of rising what we call EU or Euro skepticism. It's not about the currency, it's about the European Union. Now, so we need a new policy agenda, and I think when it comes to refugees, we should correct the mistake which we have done for long. We should allow refugees to work, because the dogma in the past was when you're a refugee, you should not work until you're officially recognized, which can take years. Yes, and then we know that from long-term unemployed, when you're not in the market, you have difficulties to find a job and to be integrated. So we make the problem which we are complaining later on about. So that is a kind of core messages. Now, Europe is at the crossroads, I would argue. If Europe solves the migration challenge, yes, what we have seen here, the EU can still collapse. It could survive, but collapse, I would argue. However, the EU will most likely collapse if we fail, or if Europe fails to solve the mobility issue. So the mobility issue is a very important one, which the European institutions have to deal with, and that is what my message is, and I will come back to that. So the famous "my country first" approach, or what I also would call it the fencing ourselves in approach, has to be balanced by European integration and identity. So what you hear in this country, you also hear in European countries, my country first, why not? Yes, I mean, but other countries also have, in our own interest, have a right to be balanced with the interests, and in particular, if you want to build a European Union. So the EU needs more, not less Europe. That's the message. And in particular, that countries still have problems to accept nowadays, that we need kind of a joint solidarity. A union has to be solidaric in a few issues. So if people claim money, if they run into financial market deficits, then we also need to have more solidarity when it comes to the refugee issues. That's why a kind of quota system where responsibilities have to be taken according to well-defined criteria is necessary, but it's at the moment refused. So all people who are not allowed to come to Germany at the moment anymore, if they are stranded in Greece, are stranded there, and nobody takes them over. But Greece cannot take the burden alone. That's an unfair solution of the problem, as you may agree. Okay, so there we have these kind of issues. Now, literature, very quickly, because we have no time is running. There are 2 or 3 books which I'm involved with. So we had for years, since the EU-Enlargement, we had a big multi-country research team studying over years regularly on discussing the effect of EU-Enlargement. And this is kind of a natural experiment. There were 2 books, this one and that one. By the way, my co-author Martin Karnec is working at the Central European University in Budapest, in Hungary, and you may have heard yesterday and also today it's in the news that the Hungarian government wants to push out this university out of the country because they are too democratically oriented and maybe also to be pro-migration. I myself was a couple of weeks ago presenting the 2nd book here in that university for that country, and together with the rector at that time, and he was very happy about that book. And I mean, this explains how far we are now. Yes, I mean, most of you will know that this university is one of the leading, if not the leading university in Eastern Europe when it comes to economics, and one of the few highlights, yes, we have, and it's ranked under the top 50 universities in the world. So it's a kind of very shocking way of dealing with science policy. Yes, I mean it's okay. Now this is a handbook in migration economics, which also provides lots of evidence behind what I'm talking here about. For instance, about the welfare take-up, just as an example, or whether natives are affected by migration. Now, okay, so for those who are interested in the migration, jobs, and integration in Europe issue, so the internal mobility issues, there's a survey made for policymakers largely, which is also downloadable from my website, the paper, but this is open access also. It's in the Migration Policy Practice journal. Now, if you want to see, I mean, some of the implications, this paper here maybe comes closest to what I'm speaking about at the moment. Yes, Challenged by Migration, Europe's Options. It was just finished early last week. So it's a Untitled working paper. It's downloadable there. If you just go to my name pop at Untitled, you easily come to that paper. The other 2 papers are also relevant in this context. You also find them on my website when you go there. Now, I'm not going into all these literature. I'm just saying there's good and strong literature, and I'm not only. I mean, Borjas is a person who is well known in the United States. He's more critical about migration than I am, and even he admits that the labor market consequences of refugee supply shocks is, there, but small. A bit of employment effects, yes, but small. He comes to the same conclusion in this study, like this guy who is working for the Turkish Turkish central bank, who summarizes the natural experiments in migration. This is basically about refugees, yes. These two papers are more or less the same, and this, by the way, is the ICA World of Labor project, which I have once created and directed for many years. Okay, now, and as I said, the study of the OECD, how are refugees faring on the labor market in Europe? That's based on past data. It's not saying what current refugees are really doing. We have not yet enough knowledge about that. Now, perceptions, and I have to jump, I have to a little bit increase my speed to get the major messages. Perceptions are important for policy making. They're not necessarily based on what people think, yes, on migrants and refugees and as is good or bad and so on. Do we want to have more or less and so on? So this is based on many things, and of course there are ways to try to judge this. I give you first, before I show you the slides, the basic message. Message number one I already have indicated. So if the attitudes towards migrants in general are, if you look at OECD data, country for the OECD countries, it has to do, there are two classes, so to speak, of countries. There where you have an active labor market integration policy, the tensions or are less than in those countries where you don't have such a policy. So having an integration program which brings migrants to work and gives them chances to have jobs, what they want to have, yes, then that's useful in general. This is one of the consequences. The other research result, what you find is migrants are most of the time under mistrust where there are no migrants. Yes. So typically, let's say in Germany, it's Eastern Germany. Dresden was the center of revolution against more migrants at the moment. There are no migrants in Dresden. Yes, only a handful of those. Yes. Or Italy has typically a small number of, recently more, but migrants. But nevertheless, Italy has more resistance than other countries against migrants. So if you don't see something, you can be wonderfully upset. And so certainly one strategy is to bring people, make migrants, also refugees, visible, and bring them together with natives. This is certainly one policy conclusion one can get from this literature. There is literature on it, and I have cited it here, but I have not much time. I would like to just jump over and just go to one study which is also done for the United States, with data for the United States, because there's the same issue here, the paradox of the immigration debate, distorted perceptions of the influence of immigrants on the economy. He was running regressions on the question, do we want to have more in the United States migrants? And what it's explained by many variables in the regression. So the question is also if there are racist feelings by people, or if they are misinformed about the benefits of mobility, what is the real reason why people are against migrants? So it's not so much racism or something, or cultural differences. It's significant, but it explains only a small part of the variation. What is the largest part is that people misunderstand the advantages of migration. They have not accepted that migration is much more beneficial than they think. That is the conclusion in this study, and this is something that is very similar also. You can find that in Europe. Okay, now what are the conclusions here out of this attitudes literature? And I think that's a very important issue for the debate, policy debate. When we talk about refugees, we have to make sure that they have a chance that they get what they want to get, and what we in the past have not, at least you're not allowed. So a refugee typically was not allowed to work until he was officially recognized, which, as I said, which takes years. So if we reverse that and we create the possibilities to access for jobs, then that is good for acceptance among the natives. It's an integration tool, and don't forget that refugees come only potentially for a number of years. They are not necessarily come forever. Refugees come for until the war is over, yes, then people have to leave. So the acceptance as a refugee doesn't mean you are accepted as a citizen or with a permanent residence. You are accepted for a certain number of years, 3 years typically. And so it's only a temporary decision. But then if some people argue, oh, why should they then have an education or getting a job? My argument is, well, our development policies are not very good in general. They are a waste of money very often. If people are to get education and they get job experiences, even if they have to go home or go somewhere else later, this is still a useful investment in what we can do. So that's okay. Now, some of the facts. 2013, before the crisis, so-called refugee crisis, yes? We had already 400,000, by the way, 435,000 asylees in the EU. So just remember the number for the moment. An asylee is a person who is filing an asylum application. It's not somebody who enters the country, because some people enter and then disappear. So many people entered Germany, and then they were taken in a train, then they jumped out of the train and disappeared, maybe walking to Sweden, yes, because they have relatives there. So often people disappear, maybe they're illegal, but that's another issue. Now, this is a 45-degree line, and here is the percentage of asylees in the certain state. So Germany takes the largest part, nearly 30% in 2013, and that's the GDP of Germany. So this is a rough way to say, oh, Germany has to take most of, yes, and Germany takes most of. If you are below the line, you take more than you should take, according to this criterion, and these other countries here take less than they should, according to their share. So they should be much more to the right. So, but this was before, and well, basically, if you now look, of course, these are the effects. Asylum applications in the EU, you see, of course, 2013, it looked harmless, but booms, yeah, many more are here, admitted. 1.4 million, so it's not 430,000, 1.4 million. That is 3 times or so, a little bit more than that, that size. That certainly is, I mean, caused by the Syrian civilian war, mainly is very relevant. Now, where are these? And I was just listing that a bit for you. 2015, there were at the end 1.32 million. These are the SLEs. These are the last numbers. I just looked them up. So Germany took 477,000. That's 36%. It's a little bit more than the 30 we should take anyway. So it was a lot, but not so much more than we had percentage-wise before. Where is the dramatic thing? Okay, there are some others. Hungary took a lot. I mean, had a lot. But they are no longer there. They all, most of them are somehow pushed out. You see, this is 2016. So the other countries have nobody. Sweden has a lot, but no longer. Also, Sweden closed the door. So 2016, most of the people, asylees, nearly 60% are in Germany, nearly 2/3. So the question is now, why is the whole of Europe upset about the refugee issue? I don't see this. And I said, even in Germany, these numbers, yes, are relatively large. We had large numbers before. We had many immigration flows beyond refugees in history. We are the largest, relative in size, even larger than the United States, immigration country of the world, de facto, relative to population size. even, I mean, yeah, this costs money, yes, but also the question is, it's not yet so dramatic as some people say. That's what I'm arguing. Now, quickly, back up of what I said before. Yes, if you look at the refugees, we know something. We know a lot about, not about the current refugees, but about the past refugees. How have they performed over 10, 15, 20 years? There is research on it. And we can, by comparing the structure of what has been there in the past with those who are now coming, that what could happen, yes, with those current refugees. The current refugee flows, all what we know is they are not, in the average, very well educated and have lots of language possibilities. They are very young and they are largely men. One can invest in them, but it's not. It's maybe a little more difficult, slightly more difficult than it was in the past. We have to see that. But as I say, as long as we not have a million every year, and even that, it is not yet a real, very large challenge. It's just that we were not prepared at this time, although we could have been prepared. I can answer that question later. Why? We could have been prepared, so it was predictable that we would have significantly more refugees in 2015 and 16 than originally thought. But we were busy with other issues like how to save Greece, yes? And who's talking about Greece at the moment? And some people said Greece would lead Europe to collapse. Now, none of the problems you know, or most of the problems you know about Greece are not solved now. Nothing has largely changed. So we could have the same debate tomorrow again, but nobody cares at the moment. We are talking about the refugees. This explains something, how relevant the Greece issue really is for Europe and for the euro. Some people say the euro collapsed, not because of Greece, maybe because of Italy and France, but okay, that is a different issue. Okay, the assimilation is very slow in the labor market, more difficult. It takes up to 15 years just to integrate, to become similar like other economically motivated migrants. They have more difficulties to find jobs, they have low language qualifications, but 80% of all refugees are in 4 EU member states, yes, not in all of the, it's not in Slovakia or in whatever, in all of these countries who are complaining at the moment that they have a few refugees. Okay, now let me, these are the numbers, this shows this more or less, and you see this takes up to 15 years. These are the refugees here. The longer you are in the countries, the larger is the share of having a probability. Those who come for study are here, and these are coming for employment reasons. So after 15 years, those who have refugees are alike in terms of employment probability to those who come for employment into Europe. The same is with refugees in the native labor market. I already referred to that. There are causality studies, and the effects are there on employment, on native employment, but very small, and no effects on wages. Okay, now this is part of the problem of weak integration. This is the current picture. This is already, we're already changing this situation. So the question is, how long do you have to wait as an asylee? Somebody, you come in, yes, and you first need help, and you're brought somewhere, and after a while, you file an application. It's not easy to file an application, or even that takes time. But then from the time of filing an application until you are recognized, you are an asylee. And the question is, can you work or not? And there was a time where the answer was never, until you get accepted. Now only Lithuania and Ireland have never. The other countries have 12 months, like Malta, Slovakia, Romania, and I mean Germany and others, Greece, have 3 months. Yes. So we turn to a policy where people, if they have a job offer, can take the job offer and sometimes even leave the area where they are brought to. Normally, people are brought in Germany. Normally, there's a quota system. You're brought to a certain area in Germany, and maybe there is no job. Yes, but you get food and you can sleep and so on, and make your application. But then it's very soon you have to be able to take up a job, and then you are now allowed to leave the area and go to another part of Germany. You're not allowed to go to another country like France or something like that. You should be able after some time, in my view, but that is also under debate. Okay, now let me finally come to the policy issues, and I'm still good in time. I know a few moments I can speak longer. So I would like to take a few of the issues I have outlined here and discuss it with you. There is a lack of a coherent migration policy in general in Europe. It's a country issue, a state issue. And this also applies to asylum and the refugee policy. It's a humanitarian challenge, but also an economic challenge. But because we want to find solutions, not because we want to accept that people misuse the asylum principle. Some people say, oh, if somebody wants to work, this is a misuse of the asylum principle. This was the original idea, yes? People come because they have political pressures and they need help. They not come for work. But this is naive, a naive position, because people who come for political pressure also want to finance their living, and we should have an interest in that. And that's why that we should also consider early the possibility that they can earn their living. It would be naive to believe that none of the people who are coming as a refugee or as a real refugee have no economic motive. That is, to the contrary, we should have an interest. But we should have then also an interest to qualify people early and to bring them at places where they can be having a job. And we have to share responsibilities in a way that maybe Greece or Italy or Spain have to take over, and they don't do this right so far. And Turkey, which is now jumping in a bit in a very dubious way. I don't have time to talk about that. Yes, they may have the job to the reception, to maybe receive people and register them, but then they have to be brought somewhere else. And Greece no longer accepts that. They prefer to send people, just put them on the street and say, go and find your way to Germany. That was the policy for a while. Or the Italians have done that for a while. Now, they do this because if they do it differently, if they say we have refugees, now who takes a share? There are a few 100,000 of refugees where there was an agreement to distribute them across Europe, and no European state has taken them. So there's a real issue of European solidarity. So we need a quota system at the beginning to take over the burden, which cannot be left to the three major entry states in the south of Europe. So that is certainly one issue. Of course, one we have to, and this is done at the moment, one has to talk with regions in the south of Europe. Also one has to see in not only the European neighboring states, but also in the states or around the states where there are the political conflicts, whether one can help to stabilize the refugee camps there. The problem is only the money which was promised to go there is also largely not coming. Yes, we are not talking too much about that. Also, there has to be a way to register for asylum in these countries. Then people don't have to come to Europe over the sea. Though this is an important issue. Now, then we have to remember us that war refugees and political migrants are temporary immigrants who mostly want to return at some time or move on, and that should be early accepted and realized, and so that the issue, the challenge is maybe not as big as people think. And then we have the issue of successful integration, and there comes the employment prospect, which has to be considered early, which I have raised a few times. Now, I would like to skip out of time constraints these two media, well, maybe a few words about media, but very short. Certainly, a big issue is that, and this is also the issue about evidence-based policymaking. Evidence-based policymaking is not alone sufficient for convincing societies nowadays to make a good policy. The evidence as such is often ignored, as we see. So we need to have, in addition to economic arguments or rational arguments, fact-based arguments, we need to have other motives which have more to do with the heart and not with the brain. Yes, the brain and the heart has to come a little bit more together. We need a vision for an open society and a willingness to help people who are in need, which is largely there, but maybe not enough mobilized to bring societies as a whole politically together to make a useful decision at the end. So, and certainly the media have a big role in that context. And I mean, I have no time to talk about this, but there is certainly some way to improve here. Now, conclusions. To make long stories short, immigration, I would like to summarize that, is in general positive for economies. We need mobile and open labor markets to create welfare. That's otherwise, well, of course, like everywhere in the world, we can ignore that. Then we have less output and less to distribute. Okay, if societies are more happy, I mean, you can spend your potential income in different ways. Yes, you can ruin your country and be happy. Yes, that's possible. But this is a political decision. Often policymakers for some time make do this. For instance, I was pushing for the labor market reforms in Germany. We have lots of well done reforms, not very well received. Very people hate these reforms in Germany, like everywhere in the world, when it becomes hard. But we're doing very well in the labor force, and that means we also have lots of money now to spend, and that's why our current and the last government has spent lots of money for useless things, which costs the next generations tons of money. But we were able to do it. And the majority wanted it, so why couldn't we do it? For a while, this is possible, but not forever. There are constraints. So that's why I'm saying we can ignore the advantages of mobility. We can give this up, but then we have to pay a price in the long term, and this has to become transparent. Now, the refugees, beyond migration, we need more migration. The refugees are not really those migrants we badly need in the long term, to be honest and transparent, in Europe. Perhaps a large part of them can be qualified, but it will take a while. But to argue that the current, and also even if it goes on for a year, refugee flow will hit Europe hardly economically on the labor market or in the economy in general, it would be just wrong, because neither the numbers nor the potential they have to harm Europe is strong enough. Now, the refugee issue cannot be handled by letting everybody act alone. So that's what we at the moment are doing. Yes, Hungary has a fence. Yes, Greece says we send everybody back to Turkey, and even the Germans say, well, we will have one day enough. Yes, or in the Slovak country, they were afraid about 30 or 40 more refugees from one year to the other. This was a heavy debate in an election campaign. This is not doable in the long term. So we have to find a solution.
we may not find one, yes? But then Europe, I cannot, it's very difficult to predict that at the moment. So it looks like that everybody seeks its own advantage. Then we will have a de facto Brexit of many more countries, yes, de facto, yes. Then the European Union will break into pieces if this problem is not solved, because otherwise it will lead to an explosion. The right-wing parties may take over, and I think that's a big governance issue. So, but beyond the refugee issue, we should have a transparent immigration system that structures labor immigration. This does not mean that there are more migrants coming, yes, but it should be a transparent system. How can you enter Europe to take up work? Yes. Now there's no general, clear, transparent system for that. You see, if I want to immigrate, the United States is also complicated. If I want to immigrate to Australia, I go to the website and I plug in my criteria, and then I get told what are my options. And frankly, not very good. Australia uses the point system to keep people out. Yes, they tell me you are too old. By far, we don't want you. Well, if a university would sponsor me, perhaps, yes. But okay. So this is not about necessarily about more migrants, but you need to have a transparent system for migrants from the world to see whether they have a chance, under what conditions, and also how they can qualify, maybe language or education or whatever criteria. We can go into that. Also, the natives want to know in the country, in the European countries, who is coming under what conditions, and if we can transparently show who is coming and that these are an advantage, that would be helpful. So a point system could be useful, but it doesn't have to have the name point systems. There are other systems doing it. The United States has no point system and still doing something similar with. Maybe not as good as the Canadian system, in my view. Now, we need more immigration and mobility. We also could have and should have what is called circular migration, so that people have chances to come for certain times, as long as they have a job, and they leave again if they have no job. This is basically also the principle within Europe. Yes, it's an illusion to believe that you are, if you're Pole, that you can go to France and stay there. You can go there and stay there if you have a job. If you don't have a job, then you need to have income from other sources. Yes. Property or whatever, so you have to prove that, then you can stay. Otherwise, you also have to leave. So this is not unhuman that to allow people to come and also have to leave, and that could increase more mobility and also allow people. When you talk in Senegal with what I was doing with refugees, so-called refugees, but now economic refugees, who came for work. Or plan to go, or was in Bern for work, they don't want to come forever. They have illusions about what the situation is. They need more information. But if they have an option to go for circular migration, they would do it, and they would not try to be so-called refugees. Okay, now we need a quota system and so on, and we need better communication. That is certainly clear. If it comes to refugees, we in particular, I would like to summarize that we need not only quotas for the short term, we need an early profiling where they could work and early work permits. If this is done, then the resistance against refugees would go down, in my view, and it would be also an helpful investment in if they would stay permanently or if they would go back to their country of origin. Yeah, with these remarks, I would like to thank you for your attention and interest. And I know that not all questions are answered. There are many things standing. I'm happy to talk with you either now or after in the reception for longer on a face-by-face. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I was curious actually about your continuing theme about the temporary nature of refugees. I'm not as familiar with refugee migration patterns, but historically looking at things, for example, like temporary worker programs, we see that by and large, most migrants who initially migrate with the intention that it's going to be temporary turns into something that's actually much more permanent. The longer a migrant stays at a destination from home, the greater the incentives are for them to stay. So really depending on the particular circumstances of what drove a genuine refugee from their home, it seems the assumption that these people are only temporary seems unrealistic based on past migration patterns.
Well, first, you say already that it's on migration in general, not on refugees, because by definition, refugees are, if they're war refugees, for instance, if they're war refugees, they are initially only accepted for a shorter period, and that is typically 3 years. Then either the situation hasn't changed or they have to return. And if you look at, let's say, the experience we had in Europe with the Balkan Wars, a large part of, too many, I have to say, of those who came to, let's say, Central or Western Europe during the Balkan Wars returned. So it's true that in many other circumstances refugees may stay, but the legal issue is for refugees is clear, and there are these experiences. Now, if you refer to other migrants, then you may refer to what is called the guest worker program in Europe, yes, or also in Germany, but it was in Europe. There is a myth that the guest worker program was created and everybody stayed. As I always indicated, it's a myth. It's not true. 2/3 of those who came returned, and even nowadays, people when they retire, from the labor markets, they return. So that's part of a myth. There are, we have, in particular in Germany, but also in other countries, we have had a misunderstanding when the guest worker program was terminated about what would happen, which is very important. Also, what you can also observe similar in the United States, in the Mexican and American United States. My colleague, Doug Massey, from Princeton, he has spent half of his life to study the Mexican-US migration, and originally that migration stream was a migration stream of circular migration. People came for work and then returned. At first it was legal, then it was kind of illegal, and at the end, when it was become really illegal, then more and more Mexicans stayed in the country. Why? Because you couldn't go home. It was more risky to go home. You worked longer, and you brought family. And the same thing we had in Europe, and I've written on that, with Turkey and let's say Spain or Portugal. There are huge wage differentials between Portugal, Spain, and Germany. So most Portuguese should be in Germany. They are not. After the labor recruitment in 1973 was stopped, the net flow or the absolute flow between most countries, besides of Italy and so on, and Germany broke down. So most Portuguese stayed in Portugal, and because there was free mobility, they could have come at any time, in particular if they had a job. However, so the ethnics from Portugal and other EU member countries, the stock of labor went down. Now, the stock of laborers from Turkey remains the same. And on top of the stock of labor workers from Turkey were 2 or 3 more for every Turk, more others who were no longer working or were family. So this was all, then you see this in the number. After 73, the Turkish population in Germany explodes, yes? I have no problem with that as such, as I would like to stress that, but as such. But it was created because why? Turks, when they would have left the country, could no longer come back. They were not part of the labor, the European labor market. That's why they stayed. So the normal return, migrants typically there's return migration. There's also the myth that lots of people go to the United States. Yes, that's true. But lots of people leave also the United States historically. Yes, it's just not well recorded. Yes, there's this impression that everybody who comes comes, yes, and stays forever. It's not true. Net migration is typically much lower than gross migration. So the Turkish, to make the argument at the end, the Turkish population exploded. We got lots of people who are not working anymore, and we were surprised at the end they were not integrated because we did nothing for integration. So I think that is largely, also from general migration, is largely a myth. Migration is always immigration, but always also to a large extent emigration. Yes?
Well, thank you, Professor Zimmermann, for the great talk. My name is Benjamin Lee. I'm an undergraduate student at Maxwell. Studying international relations, doing my capstone currently. And as an example of the sort of profiling and pre-departure programs that can be implemented on an EU level, there are integration programs that non-EU states implement in hosting refugees that are incoming. And Norway is an example of their NORCO program, which is the Norwegian Cultural Orientation Program, in which they have sort of liaisons go to countries that are hosting incoming refugees, and it's relatively successful in their pre-departure profiling of not only the incoming refugees, but the culture and society that they'll be going into. And if that's capable on a national level in which the host country is relatively homogeneous, how could the EU implement a sort of similar program or policy across the EU, the international levels, in which countries are more heterogeneous?
Yeah, well, I think it would be unrealistic to
expect that Europe would create a very complex system. I would argue that what we need is a very quick transfer to a certain country which takes responsibility in the first round. What does this mean? This means that well, if I could make the decision now, yes, I mean for Europe, I would argue that in the border states we would have so-called welcome camps or centers. Let's call it not camps. It's the wrong word. Welcome institutions where centers, yes, where you are registered, well, including getting fingerprints, safety on these days. I have no problem with that, but also registering documents, but not only finding arguments why we can send you back, but arguments knowing what kind of qualifications you have. In the context of the labor market reforms in Germany, the labor office has implemented what we call profiling. Yes, so people were examined when they become unemployed, what kind of talents they have, abilities or needs, and that's something we should find out early, and then a cultural background, languages, and so on. And then I would prefer that, given on this basis, one has to see where to place the people in the system of the quota. There are many factors where people, I mean, depending on language, on ethnic identity, and so on, where people are placed. Also, maybe on where their abilities could be needed or where their education could take place. And then there should be a number of places in Europe where people could be sent abroad. So I mean, most of the people who are in Germany at the moment, I was speaking with a colleague at Harvard University last year when I was at Harvard. This person had for weeks interviewed at the border of Macedonia everybody who came through, and practically everybody wanted to go to Germany, and he found out why. And well, the answer was not because Germany has the richest welfare system, but because they had relatives or friends or connections of others. There are many Syrians in Germany, yes? So that was the major reason. So we should not ignore, because migrants typically are mobile in terms of ethnic networks. So we should place people where other ethnicities are of the same type, because there's a language advantage. People help to integrate them, and they would move anyway in that direction if we would hinder it. So that would be a better strategy. I mean, what you have reported about Norway sounds fantastic, but I'm very, very skeptical that Europe finds the power to do this. I'm sorry.
Hi, Professor Zimmermann. Thank you for the talk. I'm a PhD student in economics at Maxwell. I have a question on policies, labor market impact on refugees. So I know certain countries in the EU have quota system already, but they're targeted in illegal immigrants. Their worry was about they were working more in the informal jobs. So the quota system will help them to coming out of shadow and transit to the formal jobs. And for refugees, I'm wondering the quota system or any policies related would affect their labor market outcomes is just from informal jobs to formal jobs, or is there any other implications for the policies?
Yeah, we have to be cautious to not mixing up first, I mean, the refugees and other illegal migrants. Now the question is how you can you become an illegal migrant without being a refugee? Well, I mean, refugees are those who are trying to register for the status as a refugee. Yes, so who think to have a chance. That's this category first, and they are in this sense not illegal. They are legal. I mean, they are legal. There are people who come and say, I want to apply. I mean, at this stage, they do something right. Yes, I mean, they've done nothing wrong by law. So, and we have to first. That's one thing. We have to deal with them. And those I think the major problem is they have no chance. They are sitting in a camp, typically in Germany, in one of these reception centers. They are supervised by somebody, yes. It's even, I mean, they close the doors in the evening, yes, and people hanging around and have nothing to do for months, yes. So they are supervised. They don't work illegally. I mean, perhaps. I mean, they climb over the fence or whatever. They do something during the day. This is all possible, yes, but at least it's of a minor relevance. Yeah. So there, the issue is that they are there and they're waiting for their acceptance. In that period, they should be allowed for work. That's one model, and get maybe educated, get an education. Yes. Now the others, what you are also talking, which are existing, are illegal migrants who are sometimes call themselves refugees, but they are coming for economic motives. Well, they're crossing the border on a ship to Spain, and then they are somewhere. I've spoken with these people, for instance, from Senegal and other places, who have done that. They are illegal first. They are not refugees. They don't consider them as refugees. They want to work, and they are illegal workers. They do very, very simple illegal things, working. Typically, they trade something, and so on. And of course, they to get them out to the legal system is a more challenging issue. You were asking basically how can this be done? Basically, we should inform people early in sending countries or offering alternatives. That would be my way, to go to Senegal or those kind of countries where there are already institutions trying to avoid or to hinder people from leaving, yes, by educating them, giving them other chances. And my other chance, I would say, we should offer circular immigration contracts that they can come for a certain period, when we can have also jobs. So people have to register in their country of origin. When they are once caught, we have to send them back home. I think that is the legal reaction to that. There is no other possibility, unfortunately. an illegal migrant is to be an illegal migrant. Yes, I mean, even yeah, they maybe enter. I mean, there are sometimes decisions where one accepts illegal migrants, but if you can only do it once, and then I think it's a difficult policy. I would not. I personally would say we cannot help. You have to return. Okay.
I think we'll break here because it's 5:30, and invite you to the reception. If you have a question, please come down and meet Dr. Zimmermann. So thank you for coming, and I hope you'll join me in thanking Dr. Zimmermann again.